Welcome to Step by Step, a video Bible study series presented by the Monte Vista Church of Christ in Phoenix, Arizona.
Of all the questions surrounding Jesus Christ by religious folks, none are probably more controversial than the question surrounding his identity. Who was Jesus of Nazareth? Who was he exactly when he was on the earth 2,000 years ago? Was he merely a man? Was he merely just a Jewish rabbi, a good moral religious teacher, or was he something more? Was he God? Was he literally God in the flesh? Is he God today? I want to submit for your consideration that Jesus is God. He was God when he was on the earth 2,000 years ago, and there are at least four reasons why we can be pretty or absolutely certain about that. First, we can be certain that Jesus was literally God in the flesh when he was on the earth 2,000 years ago because the Bible says so. Jesus says so. The gospel writers tell us this over and over again. We find a great example of this in the Gospel of John, in John chapter 1. We go over to John chapter 1 and we start reading with verse number 1, John chapter 1. In verse number 1, the Bible says, in the beginning, this is in the beginning when God created the world. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. He was with God the Father, and the Word was God. That is, the Word was of the same nature as God the Father. He was deity. He was in the beginning with God. We go down to verse 14 of the same chapter, and we find out exactly who the Word is. It says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. Here we see clearly that the word that is mentioned here is a reference to Jesus. Jesus was in the beginning with God the Father. Jesus is of the same nature as God the Father. He is God. He is also deity. We learned that at the beginning of the Gospel of John, but then we go on to John chapter 8, and we read the words of Jesus as Jesus speaks to the Jews of his day after he tells them that Abraham, someone who lived 2,000 years prior to this moment, after he tells them that Abraham rejoiced to see his day. In John 8 and verse 57, it says, so the Jews said to him, you're not even 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? How is that possible? Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. Therefore they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. Question, why are the Jews so angry at Jesus on this occasion? Why do they want to kill him? Why do they want to stone him? Well, the answer is very simple. The reason why they're so angry and want to kill him is because he emphatically claimed to be God. He claimed to have existed before Abraham. He claimed to have been the I am. That is the same language that God used in the book of Exodus when speaking to Moses through the burning bush to describe his eternal nature. Jesus is God because he himself claimed to be God, and he backed up that claim by performing great miracles and ultimately being raised from the dead. But a second reason why we can be certain that Jesus is God is because of his involvement in the creation. His involvement in the creation of all things. Again, John chapter 1 and verse number 3 says, all things came into being through him, and apart from him, apart from Jesus, nothing came into being that has come into being. In Colossians chapter 1, and beginning with verse number 15, when describing Jesus, Paul says he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn or the preeminent one of all creation. For by him, by Jesus, all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things. And it also says, through him, in him, all things hold together. Notice how here Paul talks about Jesus' involvement in the creation. He says that Jesus created all things. He says that Jesus sustains all things. Jesus created the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, all the animals and the plants. He even created me and you. Jesus is the creator, and that makes him deity. That makes him God. But then a third reason why we can be certain that Jesus is God is because his disciples, his apostles, his followers on the earth referred to him as God. They called him God. We find a great example of this in John chapter 20. In John, the 20th chapter, after the apostle Thomas examined the risen body of Jesus, in John chapter 20 in verse number 28, John said to Jesus, "My Lord and my God." My Lord and my God. Notice how Thomas here in the Gospel of John, Thomas emphatically calls Jesus God, and Jesus does not rebuke him. Jesus does not say to him, "You're lying. I am not God." No, Jesus accepts Thomas calling him God because he knew Thomas was telling the truth. Jesus is God. Jesus is deity. He was God in the flesh. And then we come to a fourth reason why we can be certain that Jesus is God, and he was God in the flesh, is because he accepted worship. He accepted worship from his people while on the earth. We find great examples of this in the Gospel of Matthew, in Matthew the 14th chapter. In Matthew the 14th chapter, in verse number 33, after Jesus calmed a terrible storm miraculously, it says that those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "You're certainly God's son." We go on to Matthew 28. And before Jesus ascended to heaven to sit at the right hand of God, in Matthew 28 in verse number 16, it says, "But the 11 disciples proceeded to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had designated. And when they saw him, they worshiped him. They worshiped him, but some were doubtful." Here we find Jesus being worshiped by his people on the earth, and after or while being worshiped, Jesus does not stop them. He does not rebuke them. He does not say, "I'm merely a man, do not worship me." No, Jesus accepts worship on the earth. In fact, not only can we read about Jesus being worshiped by those on the earth, but in Revelation 5, we can read about him being worshiped by those in heaven. Jesus is worthy of worship. He accepts worship. And the reason why that is because he is God. And so due to his claim to be God and the fact that he backed up that claim by being raised from the dead, and due to the fact that he was called God by his people, and due to the fact that he received worship and he created all things, we can be absolutely certain that Jesus was not just a man while he was on the earth, but he was God. He is God. And let us make sure we worship him and follow him and submit to him fully, because if we're going to make it to heaven at all, it's going to be through Jesus and only through Jesus.
Thanks for watching. For more online Bible study material, or to find more episodes in this series, visit us on our website at montevista.church.